I talk a lot about finding your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and all of that. And I've heard stories from multi-time CEOs who've told me that literally it was just they went to their best salesperson.
Yeah.
And the best salesperson actually knew what the correct ICP was. And they were crushing the number, letting their peers basically lose, but they were crushing the number. And when the CEO's like, so what's our ICP and ideal buyer persona? They knew exactly what it was.
Absolutely.
It's
That's hilarious.
The answer is there, right? Like it's there. You don't have to have all the answers. But you have to tell people what the questions are you're trying to answer. That part, they don't know. That part.
Exactly.
So if you tell them these are the questions,
right,
a lot of times the answers are there.
Totally.
But you got to tell them what those questions are.
I just want to say thank you so much, David, for being with us today. I was reflecting and thinking that this episode particularly, is a long time coming. I think like 10 years in particular, right? Obviously through your incredible journey at BetterCloud, which we can talk about. And you just being such an incredible friend to us at Workbench and the greater New York City community, all the dinners we've done together, all the meetups we've spoken at, the Japanese whiskey we've consumed, right? And now we've snagged you as our CEO in residence at Workbench. You're with us every Thursday, Wednesdays, some Mondays, and just seeing the incredible work you're doing with so many of our founders and beyond, right? And what we so appreciate about you is just how you've always kept it real, right? And that's why it's very fitting to have you to be talking about all the things founders should know before they're even founders.
I'm very excited. I think that this is going to be a really helpful tool and asset for just the community of founders and people thinking about being founders. So like I'm very excited to do this. And I think just in the conversation we've had about who you're going to have on this show, I think that there's going to be a lot of really good content, and it goes along with the stuff that Workbench has been doing for forever, right? I mean, like with the meetups that you've done and with all the master classes and everything, this is just like an extension of that. And so it's really exciting to be on here and talking with you.
Yeah, we're pumped. This is just a fancier version, right?
Exactly.
Souped up version. Exactly. Okay, well, awesome. Well, let's just jump right in, right? Like I'm planning to kick off every pod. And I will kick off every pod with this question, which is, what's the one thing you think founders should know how to do before starting a company?
There's a long list. I mean, the list for me is endless. But I would say that if there's something, one of the things is just around communication in general. I think that as a founder and as a CEO, of a small company, and as you scale, it's at every stage, you have to be able to communicate to your team, with your team, to your investors, to the market. And I think that's a skill that is has to be learned, because when you're speaking as a CEO, when you're speaking as a founder, it carries a different weight than it does when even if you are CRO of a 5,000 person sales org. It is different when you are the founder and the CEO. When you're the founder and CEO, you have to repeat yourself unlimited times. That is a painful thing to do. It's hard to do that, but it's necessary to do that. So it's the communication. It's how do we get everyone aligned? How do we use the communication to get everyone aligned? How do we get people amped up and excited about the mission and the vision of the business? All of that comes down to communication. I wasn't a great writer, for example, and you have to become a good written communicator. You have to be good verbal communicator. You have to be it's so many of these elements that I don't think are, they're not, at least in my experience in my career, they weren't taught to me earlier.
Exactly.
You have to, and you have to find your style. You can't necessarily take someone else's style. You have to, so I think the communication, the ability to repeat yourself, the ability to motivate the team, the ability to align the team, those are the things that I think that is really important.
I'm so glad you bring that up. And it's almost counterintuitive, right? At least I think when I speak to early stage founders at Workbench, I think when they come in, they think, I got to know how to build a great product. I got to know how to sell. Very few people say, oh, I got to know how to write like a great CEO email, right? And one of the things I talked about with you is, almost all founders have worked at a company before, right? It might have been a small company, might have been a big company. So in theory, they should have probably seen what a great all hands looks like, what a great offsite looks like. But interestingly enough, and maybe it is because they were not the CEO, right? So they were not themselves the ones responsible for really relaying this message. But it is, to your point, interesting that despite founders having worked at other companies, as soon as they step into the CEO seat, it is different.
Very different. Very different. And because I think you have more constituents that you're speaking to than if you're in a specific job at a company. You have, and each constituent is different. When you're speaking to your investors, that is a different way of communicating than when you're speaking to your team, like your direct team, your leadership team, then your employee base, then your customers, then candidates looking for jobs. Like each one is its own constituent. And even if the North Star is the same, the way it's communicated, and even the mode in which it's communicated is different.
I mean, the context switching, right? You could have a 2 p.m. all hands with your whole team, then a 3:30 customer call, and that could be totally different messages, right? Actually, depending on the state of the business, right? And, you know, the thing I talk about a lot with our founders is to your point, like, you really have to think of yourself as a CRO, like Chief Repeat Officer.
Yes, 100%.
Just repeating, but repeating maybe in different styles or different type of tones or different slight different nuances. And going back to what you said too is even, you know, something we talked about earlier is that founders, even at like, I find even 6-person companies, 10-person companies, the ones that we're investing in at Workbench, even 10-person companies, you would think all 10 aligned, everyone's on the same page. And then you get in there and you're like, actually, even with 10 people, it's so hard to get people aligned.
I literally just, I don't know, a couple months ago, I did an annual planning, strategic planning, quote unquote, offsite with 2 founders of a company of 8 people, 8-person company, just the 2 founders in a full day offsite. What was amazing is when we started talking about the vision, what we were going to prioritize for the next year, when we started talking about that, even they were not fully aligned on where they were going to go and invest the time because they each had different things. One was the CTO, one is the CEO. The CTO wanted to do some work on the product back end. The CEO needed the new feature to release out to get the new customer. And what you learn is, even at that size, maybe you don't need to produce all the communication. You know, when you get to bigger companies, they're doing video production and this. And you don't have to, you don't have to do that. Yeah. But you still need to communicate on a regular basis and repeat. And I think the repeat thing, I want to say something important about that is it's not just repeating yourself. It's repeating yourself and every time sounding like it's the first time you're delivering that. That's a really important part because let's use an all hands. You're going to talk about what your mission and vision is or your values or something like that every single all hands. Let's call it every month. But every time you deliver it, it almost has to be like you've never said it before because the excitement and the energy, right? When you're pitching investors, same thing. When you're telling someone about your company, people who are in fundraising mode, they're meeting with 50 investors, 60 investors, but you have to have it so that the 59th investor hears the story as if it's the first time you're telling it, with that level of excitement, with that level of just energy. And so I think that's the part that for a lot of people, it's hard because at some point you're like, am I saying the same thing again?
Yeah.
But not only are you saying it, you have to say it with that energy and excitement because maybe you have a new employee in the meeting. Maybe this investor has never heard of you before and now this is their first impression of you. This is very difficult. Like to do that. By the way, you take another layer. A lot of the people I talk to, and including myself, I've been very open about it, are not comfortable with speaking publicly or speaking in front of a big group or recording themselves or, you know, being vulnerable and open about them. Like a lot of people are not. So that's even yet another piece of the puzzle, right? Especially if you're talking about technical founders. I don't want to generalize, but generally speaking, they're going to be more of the introverted type. They're going to be less of the one who's out there. So for those people, that's even a bigger hurdle to get over.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's learnable. I think that's the part. It's learnable, even if it's not their natural muscle. So, I mean, let's break this down because what I love is you're so tactical about this, right? I mean, I think a lot of people say you got to be a good communicator, but you're like, these are the actual like 8 8, I mean, maybe even more, 10 bullet points of things that at some point in a company you should do, and I know you call it operating rhythm, right? But maybe let's just jump maybe into all hands because we've just started there.
Yes.
Right? Like, when did you start doing all hands at BetterCloud, right? Is it like, once you're past 5, 5 feels too small. It feels like too formal to do an all hands. Is it like when we're, 15 people, we're in more than 2 pizza boxes, right? And then let's break into the really tactical formula that you really put together over the years to just have I know how much work you guys put into it.
Yeah. So the all hands for me, like you said, it's all part of an operating rhythm. When I talk about operating rhythm, I feel like it's the breathing apparatus of the business. It's the thing that ensures that everyone in the company can count on these things occurring. That's when I think about operating rhythm. So it could be the annual planning, the annual offsites, the quarterly board meetings, the monthly all hands. So when I think about the all hands, let's speak about that specifically. For me, I feel like even at a 5-person company, there should be an all hands. Now, that all hands may not come with a deck. It may not come with all the elements that it would come with at 50 people or 100 people, but I believe there should be a meeting of all the employees on a regular cadence where everyone gets together and the CEO speaks about how did the business do the last month? Even if it's 5 people, what products did we ship? What did I hear from the customers that I've been interviewing? All of that should be done. In the early days of BetterCloud, when we were 5 people, we would do them. And it was literally just us sitting around a conference room table, me speaking, and them asking questions. And what you learn is even at that kind of small company, people want to have the information. They want to know, how is the business doing? Are we talking to investors? Did we sign that customer? What are people saying about the product? Even at 5 people, you're curious about that. You want a chance to have the venue to ask questions of your founder, CEO, of each other. So we started doing all hands at 5 people. I started sending emails on a regular basis, giving everyone the update on the business at 5 people. And now that evolves over time. And as the company got bigger and bigger, we started having more people speaking at the all hands, more production of the all hands. Actually, a major turning point for me was I was at a kind of CEO networking kind of thing. And I was sitting next to, at the time, the CEO of the Philadelphia 76ers.
Oh, cool.
And we were sitting next to each other. I never met him before. And we're talking about stuff. And I'm talking about the all hands. And I think it's really important. And he said, our all hands is one of the most important meetings we do at the 76ers.
Wow.
And I said, okay, can you explain what it is? He's like, we do a production.
Yeah.
He's like, I think he may have been exaggerating, but he's like, we have smoke machines. We've got, he's like, but we've got music amping people up. We're celebrating the top salesperson. We're giving out awards. He's like, I'm there getting everyone amped up. And when I heard that, and when he talked about the production that goes around it, I said, wow, I have to up level what I'm doing. And so over many years, we got to a place where we were doing all hands. We tried every week. We tried every quarter. We tried every 2 weeks. I mean, we tried everything. For us, we came down to a month was the right amount of time. We tried 90-minute meetings. We tried 30-minute meetings. We tried 10-minute meetings. We tried everything. We settled on an hour.
Okay.
So we basically said 60 minutes every month. And it, every 3rd Thursday of the month, so it was very much like a cadence that we agreed to, and we would put it on people's calendar for the whole year.
Totally.
And unless something major happened,
right,
we were not canceling this meeting.
And you never missed it, even if there was a customer or an investor.
This was a non-negotiable. We told people that calendar hold. You do not book over it.
Wow.
You do not we're holding that meeting. Now, again, there's holidays, there's this where you may cancel for Christmas, but other than that, this meeting was held.
Sacred. It was sacred.
Every single month.
Amazing.
So that was the first thing.
Yeah.
The second, we would start the meeting. Over time, again, we evolved this. We'd have music playing, a countdown clock for when the meeting was going to start, especially if you're all virtual and you can people come in and there's some high energy music and there's a countdown clock. We would always start with, here's the new people who joined the company since the last meeting. Here's the work anniversaries, and as the company gets older, it kind of, you're like, wow, that person's been here 7 years. You know, it's like, so you do all of that. Then you talk about, you know, who are we? Why are we here? Very quick. These are like 1 minute kind of slides. And then you talk about the state of the business, and that's your chance as the CEO to share the highlights and the headwinds. And this was, again, back to communication. I learned that transparency was very important. My first time leading a company years ago, I was the opposite. I held everything in. I only wanted to tell people the good things. Then I told people, hey, we're going to do this all hands, and get used to hearing the good, the bad, and the ugly. But once you tell everyone that, they come to expect it, and they appreciate that.
Yeah.
So then you have, you know, the head of the finance, CFO, VP of finance, do a, what's the score, right? What are the 5 KPIs that matter for your business, and how are you trending against those KPIs? Then celebrate some wins, you know, some new customers you brought on, some new product you've shipped, something like that. And then you go into kind of strategic topics, big things that matter for the business. Maybe that is we are doing our customer summit, and everyone should be aware it's on this day. This is what we're going to do. This is the agenda, and we need to deliver these 50 features by that day. Or it could be, hey, here's a customer, and they're going to come speak to the whole company about how they use our product. You know, those kinds of things. And then as you get to the end of the meeting, for me, my favorite part of every one of these meetings was, as you get to the end, you're actually talking about, you're giving basically recognition to people on the team for living up to your values, for going above and beyond. And that became my favorite part. And that was very much taken from the 76ers conversation of, we actually made stickers. We called it Crushing It. So at the end of every all hands meeting, every single one, we had a Crushing It section where we would actually call out a different employee for living up to a different one of our 4 values. And then we would give them a sticker that said Crushing It with the year.
Nice.
And they could put it on their laptop. And it was a very proud moment for a lot of people when they would receive that sticker.
Of course.
And they could put it up on the laptop. And we produced it. Like, I would actually have a slide with a question mark over the person's face. And then I would read something about the person without any identifying kind of information. And then at the end, and Jess is the winner. Click. Jess's face comes on. You know, and so
trumpets,
that whole thing, like that's a lot of work. But when you do that, and you do that consistently, it just, back to the point of breathing apparatus, it becomes this thing that everyone counts on. Everyone knows they're going to get the information they need. Everyone knows that they have a place where they can ask questions. Everyone knows. Whereas if you don't have that lack of certainty, I think it's uncomfortable for the team, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think the thing I'll press on, because again, the thing around recognition, it's so important, right? And especially, I talk to my early stage founders all the time. I mean, it is really hard to be an early stage company, right? I mean, as a founder, of course, but the team working there, it's an intense it's an intense place. Everyone's grinding, right? So the recognition is free. I mean, the sticker didn't cost that much. It's free. So you should do that, right? Because it goes so much further than you might even think. But the part that really strikes me is your point around being open about the good, bad, and ugly. And I think that's something that, and maybe this is, again, generalization, but I think first-time founders sometimes are nervous about sharing when things are not going well, right? And when things are going great, of course, everyone's like, you know, banging the gong, et cetera. But I really wonder, like, how you learned how much to share, right? And I think back to a conversation I think you and I had where you said, like, I used to be so nervous. We had this big goal. I actually didn't want to tell the team how bad it was, like, because it was that bad. But it was like when you told the team, actually, right, everyone actually gathered around you and said, we want to help, right?
That's right.
We actually, so I'll let you tell that story. But I think that is something, in my mind, I think founders, if all hands are just only good stuff, do you think that is enough?
No, definitely not. I think that what I have seen is that especially early stage, and I'm saying even sub 100 employees, everyone on the team, I mean, people are so tied to that company. It's a big part of not just the founder's identity. It's, if you're an employee, an early employee at a startup, you're there for a reason. You could get a higher paying job. You could get
Totally.
a more
chill.
Yeah, you could have a job where you work less hours. So you're there for a reason.
Yeah.
You want the company to be successful. As the founder, if you remember that and remember everyone here, like they probably know the answers to the problems that you're facing as a company. And so if you give them that opportunity, this has happened countless times, like literally countless times to me. And now the companies I'm advising, same thing happens. I'm like, no, just bring up this situation that you have and bring it up in the meeting. And what will happen is people afterwards will start pinging and be like, hey, Dave, you mentioned this. You know what? I actually have a friend who dealt with this at another company. Would you want to talk? Like, and all of a sudden people start coming, or, hey, you know, I know that issue and I'm the developer. I actually know how to fix that problem. I just need $1,000 for this tool. Literally. I mean, things like that where you're like, wait a minute. This big problem that we have could be faced with $1,000 tool that you know of. And they're like, yeah, but I was told the budget is kind of tight. So I'm like, but $1,000, like, you know, and so this happens like every single time. So yes, if it's an all hands that's only positive, not worth doing. Not worth doing because I think it's not really adding value. You want people to see these are the things. We actually, at some points after our board meetings, we would take the slides from the board meeting and use those in our monthly all hands that landed on the week after the board meeting. We would use those slides so they could see this is what we told the board. This is what we told them is going well. This is what we told them is not going well. And this is what we told them we are going to work on going forward. And so everyone can see that.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like there was a time when it was too much bad news in a row, right? Like
definitely. And you know, one of our advisors, he said to me, you don't want to put everyone on a death march. You don't want to basically, but now again, we're going to talk about this operating rhythm. It actually all goes back to goal setting. Because really it's about, have you set the right goals? Have you set the right expectation? This actually is the lesson where when you're starting out, right, you have these visions of like, what are we going to achieve this year? We have 100 people. We're going to grow by 300% while adding 3 new products, while also doubling the size of our team, while also moving international, while also real life, not going to happen. But when you set the goals incorrectly like that, you are on a death march because you have to show up every all hands and say, you know what? The thing we said we were going to do, we didn't do. Well, once that starts, it's very hard to kind of go back on that. And so, yes, and I've had those experiences. And the reality is, again, those are the times where it's important to be even more transparent. Hey, we set massive goals for ourselves. I'm not sorry for setting those goals, but they were too big. And we're actually going to revisit those goals and reassess and come back to you with revised goals. And I've done that. I've worked with companies where halfway through the year, we had to go back and redo all of the goals. But it's one thing to just do them and come back with no explanation versus explaining the why. Back to the point of being transparent. Totally.
Maybe you can share the very specific, I just think of these very specific experiences you had that led you, I think, to really believe in this operating rhythm. Is the time when you all had to ship like an insane amount of features because you basically had to rebuild a product in like 3 months, right? Yeah. And you set such a specific goal. Was it like 100 features, like in 100 days? Yeah, exactly. And so maybe you just talk about that just for a few minutes.
Yeah. So, our BetterCloud started as a company focused on our product helped manage and secure Google Apps. It was called Google Apps at the time. Now it's called Google Workspace, but Gmail, Drive, Calendar, all of that stuff. That's how we started the business. At some point in time, we felt like there was a ceiling to the business, call it 5 million of ARR, something like that, if we stayed too focused just on Google. And our customers were coming to us and saying, we want you to build what you have for Google, but for Slack and for Salesforce, Dropbox, and so on and so forth. So we made a decision that we were going to essentially rebuild our product from scratch because it was built in this very monolithic way that could only support Google. So we went through this massive massive. We started the project in September of 2015, and it took us until basically early 2017 to launch this new product.
Right.
It was supposed to take 9 months or 12 months. It took 15, 18 months. It was supposed to cost us $15 million. It cost us $30 million. We had to put our whole team on it.
Yeah.
So we released this new product. And when we released it, no one was buying.
Oh my God. Oh.
And this was a bet the business, burn the boats kind of decision.
Yeah.
So we went to the team and we said, listen, we will run out of money because we had to fundraise within like 18 months of that time.
Right.
I said, if we do not get critical mass of customers on this new platform, we will run out of money. And we as a team, an entire team, this is literally every person at the company.
And at the time, this was how many people?
We were probably 100 and something people.
Yeah, like
100 people.
A good chunk. This wasn't a 10-person
No.
in one office. This is like
this was 100 people.
Yeah.
Engineers were in Atlanta. Sales was in New York.
Yeah.
And so we sat down and we said, look, we need to get, I talked to investors. I said, what is critical mass? What do you consider critical mass? They said 100 customers. And after 3 or 4 investors said 100 customers, I went back to the team and I said, this is what investors have told me. We got to get to 100 customers on this new platform. And so that was in the beginning part of 2017. And we ended up turning all of our all hands, turning all of our communication, turning everything. All it was a count up to 100. So it was just 1 out of 100, 2 out of 100. And that was all we talked about for an entire year. An entire year, that was all we talked about. But what was interesting is when we got super focused on that goal and when that became everything. I mean, literally, we had all the TVs when we were back in the office, full time.
Yeah.
Every TV just had a count up to 100. That's what every TV had on it. That was it. And what happened is as soon as we started doing that, people started coming to me and saying, Dave, it's great that you want to get to 100, but the pricing model that you built, you need calculus to figure out the price. If we want to sell this, we have to simplify the price. Well, now because we had made that goal, we said, okay, cool. I think it was literally 2 days later, we changed the pricing, made it super simple. Then someone came and said, hey, we don't have the messaging because our messaging is still based on Google and how we talk about this multi-SaaS offering. So literally had to go and rewrite all the messaging. And then I tested it with customers and then gave it to the team and said, I know this messaging works. But again, back to how the whole company came together, they said, hey, we need these XYZ features. And as a sales and success team, they stacked ranked the features. We gave it to the engineering team and the engineering team understood our only goal is to get to 100 customers. If we build these features, we get to 100 customers. So they started shipping those features. We started selling because we shipped the features. Then in the company meeting, we would say, because of feature X, we closed these 3 customers.
Right, absolutely.
That thing and it started very slow. And back to the point of being scared, I'm like, we need to get to 100. And now we're February, it's 1 account. March, it's 2 accounts. April, it's 0 account. May, it's 5 accounts. So we started getting super nervous.
Yeah.
But we had told the company that's the goal.
Yeah.
And we just kept reporting on the goal. It was on everyone's screen every day. And ultimately, we blew past the 100. And we had this massive celebration. And we got everyone, we got 100 bottles of champagne, 100 balloons, 100 that gave everyone these T-shirts. And ultimately, I took that. And that allowed me to raise around 3 months later, because I had reached the critical mass that all these investors said they needed to see. Our ASP went from $5,000 to $15,000. It changed the entire business. But it was that communication along the way. Every time I would send an all hands email, not meeting, it was about that goal. And it was about, how do we get to 100? Here's a meeting I had with this customer, and why am I so excited about this product? So it all kind of centered around that.
Yeah,
and
incredible.
Everything in the operating rhythm was tied to that.
It's so incredible. And I know we talked about chief repeat officer earlier, but maybe I would revise that and say it's actually, you have to be an internal chief marketing officer.
Yes.
Right. And I love the creativity you bring to this work, right? And you have to make it fun. You have to make it memorable. And 100, it's like you just say 100 and over, and it has to be literally physically every around you and everything you hear, right?
And the name we gave it was Ekato, which in Greek, which I'm Greek, is 100.
Oh,
so
I love
it
that.
had that name.
That.
And so we did like a logo, a BetterCloud logo with the Ekato,
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But that's what it is, right? And I think going back to the operating rhythm, it's like, of course, you got to say all these things, but if you can make it fun and you make it memorable and you make it in ways that people can really also then repeat it to others, right? Like that's the other part of it. It's not just you, but you want other people to then, go and spread the message.
Yes.
I think that's a really powerful part. And then also really unlocking, it's almost like, again, when you share this huge goal, you don't even realize what your other 100 people on the team are capable of sometimes, and that they come to you and they're like, did you know we should do this? And you're like, I didn't know that.
That's right.
We should, right?
That's right.
But you
actually,
you don't know
a lot of times the answer does lie within your team.
And that's a huge thing. I think founders think I have to be the one responsible for figuring out all the answers, the solutions. I think that's most of the founders I work with think that
100%,
at least in the earliest stages.
100%.
In the earliest of stages.
Look,
right?
I'm a big. It's a little off topic of the operating rhythm, but I'm a big. I talk a lot about finding your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and all of that. And I've heard stories from multi-time CEOs who've told me that literally it was just they went to their best salesperson.
Yeah.
And the best salesperson actually knew what the correct ICP was. And they were crushing the number, letting their peers basically lose, but they were crushing the number. And when the CEO's like, so what's our ICP and ideal buyer persona? They knew exactly what it was.
Absolutely.
It's hilarious. The answer is there, right? It's there. There was one time when I asked everyone, I said, tell me, what is it that's like the most annoying thing that you have to do in your job at BetterCloud? Just tell me, like, write it down, literally. And anonymous. And the things that people came back with were these like ridiculous processes and systems. We'd gotten to 400 people or whatever it was. But they knew they literally were like, Dave, it takes 9 clicks in Salesforce to do this thing. But I know that we can do it in 1 click. Just like a simple example. And you're like, well, why don't we? And then everyone's like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, let's make it 1 click. And all of us, you start to realize, again, back to your point, you don't have to have all the answers, but you have to tell people what the questions are you're trying to answer. That part, they don't know that part.
Exactly.
So if you tell them these are the questions,
right,
a lot of times the answers are there.
Totally.
But you got to tell them what those questions are.
And you tell them these things, in all hands, in these kickoffs, in these emails, right? And I think that's really, again, going back to what we're talking about today, right? And so I guess if we only could touch on 2 other things, I'd be curious, what are the 2 other things that you really see with founders?
I will say, as it relates to the operating rhythm, if I would say the one that I'm not going to say is the one I love the most, but I will say it's the one that founders don't appreciate and that I didn't appreciate. Yeah. It's keeping your investors updated.
Interesting. That's not what I thought you were going to say.
I think that if you're, now again, we're assuming you're a venture-backed company. If you're a venture-backed company and you have investors, it is really important to keep those investors updated between board meetings. The power of that I've experienced and that I've seen the companies I work with experience is massive. Because what people don't realize, I think, what people don't realize is your investors, they're on 5 boards, 10 boards, 15 boards. They may be not on 15 boards, but investors in 27 companies. They have a lot on. They're trying to find new companies. They're busy. If you speak to them only once a quarter, you have to spend all the time getting them up to speed. If you show up at a board meeting and you missed your numbers, and the first time they hear about that is in the board meeting, it feels terrible as an investor to like, what? Even if you crush your numbers and the first time they find out about it is a board meeting, it doesn't feel good to be surprised. And what I learned is that putting in the work to keep them updated, some people do it by email. The recommendation I got was every 2 weeks, I had a 30-minute meeting with every major investor one-on-one. Sounds like a lot, but my Fridays were basically, I'd have 4 one-on-one meetings with my 4 major investors, and I would be giving them updates. I would be getting them to buy into something I was going to tell them about at the board meeting. I would tell them, hey, here's how we're thinking about this. Here's what the quarter is looking like. And by the time we showed up to the board meeting, I knew that if I brought up an idea, I want to buy this company, I already had buy-in from everyone because I had been working on that for a quarter. If I knew that when I showed up and I gave a number, we would, at the end of our quarter, at midnight, at 12:01, we would send an email to our entire board, updating them on how the quarter ended with all this detail. So that, and it was that I did not do early in my career. And board meetings, sometimes I'd have a board meeting, the person would have their head in their hands and they'd be like stressed out, look like they need like, and I realized because they were just being surprised by information.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that one for me is the one that seems like it takes a lot of work, and it's not something that people do naturally. And a lot of people look at the board meeting as a burden, right? But in reality, if you do that on a regular basis, doesn't have to be every 2 weeks, could be every month, but having that relationship, as I've talked to a lot of CEOs for my podcast that I started, there have been stories from a number of them about COVID and being in a really tough financial situation. And it was because they had those relationships, because they had built the trust with their investors, that those investors stepped up and put money in.
Absolutely.
Because the investor trusted.
Yeah.
That they knew what was going to happen with that. They knew, does that make sense? Like,
absolutely makes sense, right? And, as an investor and board member myself, it goes back to what we're saying. It's like almost counterintuitive, right? Founders are like, well, I don't want to call them too much because the news isn't always good. But it's almost like, I want to hear more from you, right? Because when I hear from you and you're going through a problem, then at least we can try to work through it together. And if we can't, I'm at least aware of it, right? And I don't know if that's every investor's relationship. So, I do think it depends on, the investor and what that vibe is. But I completely agree with you. And it is a little bit of, I always say, like, the board meeting is actually the least important.
Right.
Once a quarter, we do it because we have to from a governance perspective, and there are things that we cover. But, like, in reality, like, I probably shouldn't even need it, right? Because we should be catching up every month or even more than that, right? It is helpful, I think, the board meeting to hear the perspectives of other investors. So that's perhaps the only time, really, right? Yes. Because usually it's a founder and an investor catching up one-on-one. But
that's where you can have very strategic conversations. Yes. But my board meetings used to be reading the news.
The readouts. It was
reading
just literally
the news.
Readouts. I know.
You and I have talked about this.
I know.
And that's how I ran board meetings for a long time.
I know.
And then a board member said, it's great that you hit the numbers. It's great. But you have a crazy group of investors around the table and you're not using the time wisely. This is not a strategic, you can just send me the deck. I'm going to read it. I don't need you to read it to me.
Right.
And that for me is one that I would say is pretty important that people just don't think about or do, especially first-time founders.
I totally agree. And then also, again, sharing the stuff that's hard, right? Because that's really, hopefully, everyone on the table can contribute to that.
Exactly.
If you're only sharing, hey, this is what's good, this is what's good, then maybe we're not pushing hard enough.
Exactly. So I think that's one. The other one, if I had to choose one other one, I think it is the annual planning process.
Yes.
Because for me, like in the last year, I've helped 6 companies do this. The first time I ever went through it was with Alex Estevez, who was our advisor, used to be the CFO of Atlassian, and he took us through this. And the first year I said, why do we need to go through this? Me and the CFO, we know the business. We're just going to put together the plan like we do every year. And then we went and did an actual physical offsite for 2 days. And what came out of that was so powerful in terms of team building, in terms of alignment, in terms of really being truthful about like, where is the business? Where are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? Do we agree with each other on what those things are? What are we going to do? And then the most important last session I do for every single one, inspired by that, is what are the things we will explicitly not do? And that process always uncovers misalignment. It always uncovers things that people were not, like when you really have people in that setting.
And these are execs only.
These are leaders.
Team.
These are, let's say, these are leaders.
It's 10 people.
It's 10
5.
less. It could be somewhere from 2. But I've done it for 10.
Yes.
But when you do that, because we don't make the time. Again, even small companies, we're just every day you're firefighting, you're hustling, you're responding to emails, you're doing customer calls. But when you actually take the time to get away, tell everyone we will not respond to emails. We're literally going to be locked in a room for 2 days together. You come out of that room every year every one of these I've done, you come out of the room holding hands in lockstep. And when you show up to your company and tell the company, what are we going to do next year? All of you can complete each other's sentences.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I will say, I'll pause you right there because it sounds like you come out, it's kumbaya, but I know in that time of the kickoff.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible.
It's like, I mean, people are, I don't want to say fighting, but like people are at odds. I would say friction and tension to get to that.
Yes. I would say that I have been, every one of these I've done myself and that I've moderated, there have been tears. There have been people raising their voices. There have been people literally high-fiving each other. They're like all the emotions, you go through all the emotions. And I think that's what makes it so powerful. Because if you can create the right environment where that's okay, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Because people are like, no, I get you said you were going to do that. You also said you were going to do that last year and you didn't do that. And the person's like, well, but if you can have that conversation, it really, what comes out of those is, like you said, you are hand in hand after you've fought, after you've gone back and forth, after you've cut stuff off of each other's plans, after you've had this intense team building. A lot of times there's some real personal stuff that comes out of that. Like after you've done all of that, though, you come out and you are creating this united front, which is not as simple as it sounds. It's not always the reality, right? Because a lot of times you see it all the time. The CEO says, we're going to go from 10 million this year to 25 million. That's our goal. We're going to hire 15 sales reps. We're going to do it. But the head of sales didn't agree to that.
Yeah.
The head of marketing didn't agree.
Right.
The assumption is that engineers can deliver these 97 features, but no one took into account that they have bug fixes, they have security stuff they have to do. So until everyone is in the room, and hands are in the middle. We literally, at 1 year, we had everyone sign the actual plan, like physically sign it.
Yeah.
To say, are we that aligned?
Yeah, yeah.
You're going to physically sign your name to it. And we presented the plan with the signatures to the company.
That's so incredible. Like a physical.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you think this can be done without a third party? Because it sounds like, you almost need someone external to be like, guys, do you see these blind spots that you are not aware of?
I don't think so, because if you're the CEO also and you're moderating it,
it's very hard.
It's very difficult also even to observe the things that your team is saying. It's
course.
hard when you're
and you're in it, right? As a CEO, you're also sometimes like the de facto head of sales. Sometimes you were running marketing for 6 months, so like you're not an external participant.
Exactly, and a lot of it is logic. You need a third party. You don't need a CEO, CFO. But you need a third party who has enough business acumen and knowledge, because they have to be able to challenge without knowing anything about your business. I would say to people, so that's all you can deliver from a product perspective? I don't know the answer to that, but I know to ask that question.
Yeah.
Oh, so you're going to hit that sales number, but do you have quota? Like, do you have enough people carrying quota to hit it? No, but we'll hire them next month. You're going to hire 10 people in a month and they're all going to be ramped up. Knowing enough to ask those questions is really important, because again, especially when you're in that mode, everyone just wants to put up the biggest number. Everyone just wants to get, the most growth, the most profitability. So having a third party, I think, is really, really important in that, so that the CEO and the founders can be participants. And what I always start with is the CEO is a participant. At the end, though, they're also the final decision maker. But they're a participant. So they're going to participate just like everyone else. They're going to have their voice heard. And if we get to a place where we can't agree, they have to break the tie. But a moderator saying that is very different.
Right. I'll use this as a segue maybe, because it sounds like you're potentially putting together some sort of product or guide around this, right? Because I just think this is something I don't hear enough about, right? And it's just a resource that I think most founders actually don't have access to. So it sounds like more to come on this.
Yes, more to come on this. Yes,
more to come on this. The last two things, and we'll squeeze it in real quickly, is this ties back again. This annual strategic planning is only really with a management team, right? So it's the founders, it's your head of sales, head of marketing, head of engineering, et cetera. The one takeaway I've gotten from you, especially on leadership team meetings, right? This is another one of your operating rhythm points is having all of your leaders in the room once a week.
Yes.
Right. And it sounds obvious, like, of course, but for a lot of our founders, when they are founders, they're the only ones doing all these roles. And then all of a sudden they hire more people. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I need to bring everyone together in the room. So maybe just touch on that and why it's important to have everyone in the room.
So I think like the leadership team meetings, I found, including myself, I thought when I get to a bunch of C-level execs around me, then we're going to have our executive team meeting. But what you realize is as soon as you have anyone else responsible for any other function, it's time for you to start having that leadership team meeting.
Even if people are different titles. One could be a VP, one is a head of, one's okay.
If you have a director of sales and a VP of marketing and a CTO, they should all be in a room together because they're the functional heads of their groups. And so having everyone together, and just like the all hands, having it be time that is not booked over, having it be time that is protected on everyone's calendar and say, we are going to have this meeting. It could be an hour. It could be 3 hours. I've seen it as long as 4 hours, depending on the size of the company. But having everyone in that room, it removes the hub and spoke that occurs naturally, where you as the CEO are having one-on-ones with everyone. You know everything that's happening, but now you're having to communicate from the marketing person to the salesperson, or they're communicating without you in the room, so you're not up to. So there was a CEO who told me, he said, Dave, I don't do one-on-ones. I have a 4-hour leadership team meeting every week, and all the conversations I would have in the one-on-ones are done in that meeting. Now, I don't agree with that. I still believe in one-on-ones. But when I got the leadership team meeting, like working like clockwork, like a machine, it allowed me to go from weekly one-on-ones to bi-weekly one-on-ones. But the point is that everyone is in that room and everyone is accountable to each other for whatever metric, whatever goal, whatever. And there's a format, just like we talked about the all hands, there's a format for that leadership team meeting. Again, that may evolve. The participants may evolve. But the idea that every week there is a time for the leaders of the company to get together and talk about the things that are most important, I think that that is something that not enough people do. And when they do it as a check box, like, oh, I have a leadership team meeting. Well, what do you talk about in the meeting? Well, we just all talk about the things that are top of mind. And it's like, that's not, even at a small leadership team, it's about the format, the structure, the accountability. If I say I'm going to do something this week, do we have a checklist at the bottom of the document that the next week we're going to start with to say, did you do those things?
Absolutely. Well, I think as a tactical takeaway, we should definitely ask you if you'd be open to share that format, right?
Definitely,
we should do a tear sheet because I think you're spot on. I think most people just use it as a stand-up, right? And it is in some of these rituals or some of these like actual things you have to physically do to really make sure you're driving these things forward. Okay, awesome. So I guess if you were to fast forward through this episode, what is the one punchy TLDR you think founders should know?
As it relates to the operating rhythm.
Yeah, it relates to last.
Yeah, I think that if there's something that people take away is that investing in your operating rhythm, in that breathing apparatus for your company, the return on that investment is exponential. And to me, that's what I want people to take away is it takes time, it takes energy, it's not easy to do. It's a burden on you as the CEO for sure, but the payback is immense, and getting those rituals in place earlier than you think you need them is probably the right time.
Amazing. And I've asked you this already before, but who do you think we should interview at some point? Maybe not next, but.
That is a hard, well, a lot of different people. I think that it's the people who are willing to share details, right? I think the reason I love what you're doing with this is that it's about getting in the weeds and getting in the details, which I think is the biggest problem with most of the content out there today.
Yeah.
It's too much fluff. this company almost ran out of money and now they're worth $5 trillion. And you're like, okay, what exactly occurred?
Yeah.
Well, they sold a lot and they raised a bunch of money. Like, but what's the detail behind it?
Right.
And I actually don't know that because actually the CEOs and the founders of the most successful companies, in a lot of cases, they found lightning in a bottle.
Do you think so?
In a lot of cases, not all of them, but there are some cases where people just built the best product at the best time. It's like hitting the lottery, right? It's like what makes some of these companies successful? Because I've hired leaders from a bunch of these companies that everyone would know the names, that are the fastest growing companies. And you meet the marketing leader, for example. And how did you do it? They're like, I don't know, we were getting like 5 million downloads a month. And you're like, but what did you do? They're like, oh, well, then I sent those 5 million people emails. You're like, okay, that's not that doesn't happen to everyone. You know? And so I think actually it's the people who have grinded it out, right? A lot of those people are going to have, at least in terms of the tactical stuff, because they had to get the tactics really right.
Totally.
Right? So at least for me, I found that when I'm interviewing people, it's those people. It's the people who've been in really challenging times. It's the people who've taken 12 years to get to, 100 million, not 12 months. Those are the people who I find have more of these tactics that work for the masses. Again, we could all be lucky and hit the lottery and everything. Totally. But like the how do we put one foot in front of the other? That's where I think it comes from.
Yeah. The best analogy is, I think I might even share this with you, but I teach adults, outside of Workbench. And ironically, I teach math, which was my worst subject in school. But it's because I struggled so much.
I didn't know that part.
I have all these mnemonics. I have all these like little tricks that like I definitely are not approved by anyone, but like it worked for me. And so I find that like those students relate to me more, right? Versus like, well, of course you should just know this. Like, how do you not know this? It's like, well, it was very hard, right? So anyways,
it's actually very,
it's just like
exactly
that. And if you're just this brilliantly talented runner and you just woke up and you're just like an Olympic runner versus like someone to work really hard at it, right? And had to like learn all these things along the way. I think that's the beauty and the magic.
Yeah. 100%.
Awesome. And how can people follow you online? I know we've alluded to your podcast, which is incredible and such inspiration to this one, but
I started this podcast called Not Another CEO Podcast. I started it last year in July. I've done about 32 episodes so far, and it's been an amazing experience. So I'm doing that. I'm actually launching Substack, notanotherceo.substack.com. So I'm actually trying to take a lot of the stuff we're talking about and write it down and make it available there. And LinkedIn is usually the best way to connect with me, or just my email is david@politisprojects.com. And I will take pretty much any meeting, especially if it's with a founder or a CEO. This period, as you know, like this period of my career, the last 18 months has been about really just giving back and helping the next generation, let's say, shorten the learning curve. And it's been the most rewarding 18 months of my career, probably. And so I'm very open to talking to people and helping however I can.
Yeah, it's been such a blast watching you do this work, and more to come.
Yes.
More to come. Awesome. Thank you so much,
Dave.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.